Hello guys, welcome to another episode of State of the Culture. I am Nafisat Abdurrahman. On today's episode, we will be having a special guest, someone you're going to be wowed to have met on this show. He was a senior management fellow at Tate Gallery, London. He was also the director for young graduates of museums and gallery at British Museum, London. He is currently consulting with these people. Presently, he is setting up the History, Culture and Heritage Institute in Abuja and Lagos, respectively. To top it all, guys, he just concluded his doctorate degree in Gallery and Museum Curating. I am talking about no other but Dr. Olasheni Matthew Gansallo. It's finally nice to meet you, sir. Hello.
Finally nice to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Wow, you've achieved so much, and I can't wait to get into the discussion with you. Like, how can one person do all these things? How can one person be all these things? But before that, sir, tell us about how your journey, about how you got here, and what it was like. I mean, you were a senior fellow at Tate Gallery, and you were also the director of young graduates of museum and galleries, British Museum.
And the Natural History Museum in
And the National History Museum in London. So what does it entail? I mean, what does it feel like? What is it like being all these things in London?
Very interesting, very difficult. And and of course, like anybody else's journey through, study and getting, a job and all that sort of thing that people do. However, I studied fine art and the history of art. Then went on to study architecture. Then after that, I practiced as an artist for a while, and also as an architectural designer, to call it then. And through that, did some more courses and became senior management fellow when they were trying to readdress the work diversity balance in Britain. This was a big thing in the 90s, and trying to get a lot more people to represent big large cultural institutions like the Tate Gallery, British Museum, Natural History Museum, National Portrait Gallery, and all these large museums. I'd like to encourage people to actually go on the websites of these institutions. People will say, well, I work there and I'm very proud of them, very proud of the places, because as a student we used to go there, or I used to go there, and highly inspirational. And sometimes when I am traveling Nigeria, parts of Africa, when you speak about these places, it's like, people don't really have a concept of why it is that important to the society, and why it's so important in Britain, and what is the big deal. I've met quite a lot of people who, we don't understand, or we've not yet got there.
We've not gotten there.
Okay, to have massive institutions like this. So click on their website and get a feel of what it is and what the place does. These three places, the Tate, the British Museum, Natural History Museum, National Portrait Gallery, and other sort of 11 museums that I walked across in those days.
Your name, it sounds different.
Yes.
It is unique, I must confess. I mean, it doesn't sound like a typical Nigerian name. We have Olasheni, we have Matthew, and then we have Gonzalo.
That's right.
What tribe are you, sir? I'm curious.
Good. My tribe is the Wazobia tribe. Have you heard of the Wazobia tribe? It's the new tribe.
Like, like the Hausa, Yoruba, and Igbo.
Absolutely. I'm all that. One Nigeria, one British, and one Brazilian. So that name comes from Brazil. Quite interesting when you're speaking now about the name and the questions about Lagos and who owns Lagos and who doesn't own Lagos. Well, in those days, we, the Gonzalos, the Pereira, the Da Silvas, the Da Souzas, and all these sort of names that you will get, we tend to say that we are the real Lagosians, the real indigenous Lagosians, because we are the so-called returnees that came from Portuguese or Portugal, in those places, and we started Lagos. And that took me on my history wing when I went to sort of, it's my name that actually got me to look at the history of Nigeria and the history of Lagos in particular. So I went on a research on all that, and that's quite interesting, what came out. And we, you know, our family believe that we're the indigenous Lagosians. And there is a, there is a place in Portugal called Lagos.
Really?
Yes, Google it, find out. Everybody can do that.
Wow, so we have Lagos in Portugal.
That's right. It's a place in Portugal called Lagos.
This is
it
interesting.
was, yes, and that was
interesting.
and it was all that, and so that was the name. So we claim Lagos, and that's where the name comes from. I was born in Britain, studied all my life in Britain, so that's the British angle, and also, you know, when we were younger, when I was here younger, we used to go to the Brazilian quarters in Lagos, Campus Square, and names like Popo Aguda and all that sort of things. And there were the Brazilians and there were Sierra Leoneans, you know, and they used to live here and we used to live there. The Sierra Leoneans were the Johnsons, the Williams, and all the sort of more sort of English-like names, where we had the more Portugal, South Americans type names. So it would be great to actually begin to get a museum of Lagos. Lagos is very unique in Nigeria, and also to look at creating a museum of each state in the entire of Nigeria. A small museum that will get people to have an understanding about, you know, the culture and the history of where they live.
So let's talk about artifacts.
Good.
Before we go deep into where artifacts are, who it belongs to, and where it should be.
Good.
What do you call artifacts in your language?
In my particular language, or in my language, in my academic intellectual language?
In your particular language.
So in my particular language, which I might say that, which is Yoruba, because that is the one that we had and everything like that. One of the greatest things about that, which, you know, is when you call it like objects, or we call it Ikotamatoju.
Ikotamatoju. Ikotamatoju.
Ikotamatoju.
That sounds like something we take care of.
That's right.
Oh.
And that is where I think that is, you know, Ikotamatoju, Eitamatoju. And that is, you know, what I can attribute to artifacts.
Okay, so why do we call it that? Why do we call it Ikotamatoju? I mean, come to think of it, it's almost like we don't have these things anymore. So can we still call them that? Artifacts? Yes,
you can. However, what happened is that, you know, artifacts are human. Everybody has a memory of their family, their city, what happened before, what they left behind. It is human to collect. It is human to create. It is human to try to represent what your culture and your environment is about. And I used to tell quite a lot of my students in those days that the first language was art, rock paintings, that we give you an illustration on how to hunt, or how to do things, or how to set up a fire, things like that. So when you have artifacts, or when you keep memory and artifacts like things like that, they give you an insight into human evolution. What you were before, what happened before, and the evolution that was created for where we are now.
So it's like a history map.
Absolutely. It is an history map.
Okay, let's talk about barriers. I know we're talking about culture, we're talking about museums, but we can't talk about culture where there is no language or tradition. So let's talk about language and cultural barriers. You've worked at Tate.
Yeah.
You've worked in British Museum in London. Are there times where your culture or even your language has influenced your relationship with your fellow workers, for a start, at the museum, and even some of your clients over there? Say, for instance, you're a black man from Nigeria, and you're over there working in a white man's land. And of course, you're going to have a lot of clients who are not Nigeria. So you have to relate with people almost all over the world coming to that museum.
Yes.
So tell us.
Well, somewhere like the British Museum likes to call itself, and which it sort of represents, never mind the sort of criticism that it might get, it likes to call itself a world museum and a museum of world cultures. So it represents quite a lot of cultures across the world, from Asia to Africa, Oceania, all through, and also the English Western culture. And in some parts, even the history of Christianity and many things. And that's why it's a fantastic place. It's an amazing place to be. And once you're going through in the British Museum, you can go to the Enlightenment galleries, you can go to the Egyptian galleries, you can go to the Asian galleries, and it has all this history about human evolution. So it's the museum of the world. And so there are many languages that are represented in that organization, through spoken and visual, literal and visual. So it's something sort of so encompassing and things like that. However, there's always, which turns into a very political argument of, they were stolen, should they be taken back, and all that. So that's a whole new show that we can do. We can't go through all that one now. But there's all that talk about that. And with the new digital revolution, I think that carefully looking at things, we can get around that. But I wrote an article the other time and was saying that if we get some of our artifacts back, is it going to be accessible to the public? And do we have programs and institutions we're building to make it accessible to the public? Not just sitting in a palace, because maybe that's where it belongs, good. But if we want to show our culture, what you're saying, and our language and where we're coming from and everything, I am a great big advocate of it being out there in the public. Not everybody can enter the upper palace to look at those things.
True.
So if it has now been something that it has been done so that everybody can have access to it, or it's something that we're doing so that people, the indigenous people and people of the country, can come and have a look at it, we have to have somewhere that we have to celebrate it and celebrate our history, culture, and languages. And do I have a culture? I have cultures.
You have cultures?
Yes, I don't have.
I'd like to know more about that, because
so what's my
you're
culture?
having a lot of culture.
I have culture. So and I revel in, cultures. Where I am who I am there, and I'm comfortable with that. And we want to encourage people to do that. And I think the world is sort of going in that direction. If we want to recognize it. So, for me, I don't believe there's. Well, I've not lived one culture. I've lived
many cultures.
Well, at least 4.
Wow. Okay. You've worked at the Tate Gallery.
Yeah.
You've also worked at the British Museum, both in London. Our artifacts, Nigerian artifacts that are indigenous to us, are everywhere in the world except for where it truly belongs, our Nigerian museums.
Yeah.
And people have argued that we keep losing our culture, especially the Benin bronze. Like, it's over there in the British Museum. Please correct me if I'm wrong, sir.
Yes, some of it. Some is in the museum in Berlin, some is in America, some is Smithsonian Institution.
So
and some
they are everywhere except for the Nigerian museums.
Yeah.
We don't have access to these things. We can't even access them. And a lot of people have said, we've heard the Britons saying, oh, some of them are lucky, they've seen this thing all their life and they have value for it, they know it and what have you. And somebody said most Nigerians will never have the opportunity to see these things.
Absolutely.
Because they are not in our country. They are not accessible to us.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this?
Well, this is, since I've started my work with, or my studies with art, architecture, and history of art and all that sort of thing, this has constantly been coming up in different articles, different theorists, different people writing about, where they stolen, should they come back? That's the Benin bronzes, for instance, and there are many other artifacts taken out from Africa and from Nigeria, and and many items taken from Egypt, many items taken from different places from Asia. There are many things that the British went over and took the culture in order to study them. Now then, what are my thoughts? I have various thoughts on this. Well, there are various sort of stages and thoughts about how this can work. First of all, you said the Nigerian museums. Can you name me one Nigerian museum that has held this things and is holding this things and is actually pushing out on the education, interpretation of our artifacts, and people actually actively engaging all that, going to the museum, looking at it, and being very active from schools to the general public?
The thing is, you can't have a structure for something that is not available to you.
Absolutely.
So is the argument. So people are saying, if you give us back what belongs to us, we will create structures for them. We will create programs for them. But we can't create these programs and have students go over to these places and they don't have access to these things.
No, when you say go over to where? Go over to where? Go over to Britain, go over to London,
no.
Go over to your museums, yeah? Good. And when you say that, now, another part of some of my research and some of my thinking is that, we tend to always imitate when it comes to looking at our own culture, from fashion to architecture to now what we're calling museums, and even our art, the fine art. When I go to artist exhibition and things like that, I see what can be called, abstract expressionism or impressionism that, has gone on some 100 years ago, or cubism that's going in the Western world. And we sort of imitate it because, that is what we know thus far. And I tend to call that some form of neo-colonization, but we won't go too much into that now. And so you don't have to have a shining big building to ignite interest of your culture, artifacts, language, and things like that. You don't have to have a big shining building like the British Museum, like the Natural History Museum, and all that. No, you don't. It has to come to a concerted, sensible structure, as you said, that looks at education, looks at presentation, and looks at where we can present all these things. Now, if you call somebody like me as a curator and said that we have this artifacts and we want to take it around and want to get it around to the people, you have all these banking halls, you have all these shopping malls. I'm not saying that you just throw it in there and you don't read about it, you don't know anything. But if you do not have building, that does not mean you do not have an audience.
So there are people out there who actually are craving to see these things and know about them.
Not even there are people out there craving. They might not even have they might not have a clue. Our job as cultural historians or people who work within culture or cultural producers, from artists to architects to curators and all that sort of thing. Our job is to present this to the public, to people. So you get people who don't even know that many things exist, but you have to give them that resonance, that wonder, and that discovery. That is why we do this job. That's why we're historians. That's why people write books and do this about these things, so that somebody who hasn't got any idea whatsoever discovers it and say, wow, I didn't know that I was half Benin or half Igbo and Lagos. I didn't know that, my family resonated from the north and there was a history of revolution before I am now in this particular place in Nigeria. So we shouldn't wait for a building if we want to start the cultural revolution of understanding and discovery. Now, when we start doing that, without you telling anyone or anything, a building starts coming up. And people start saying that, instead of us, or people could start saying that it was being accidental or stopping in all these shopping malls, banks. There are fantastic buildings all over the place that if you talk to people and you say that, look, we have this Benin Bronzes, for instance, and everything, and somebody's going to man it, and we're going to say that we're going to have what we call a touring exhibition going round all these places around the country or around the city. And when people are coming to do the shopping, when people come to do this, they see them and they learn something. And so we're not, not everyone, we even know that it's not, hardly anyone wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to go to a museum to learn about the Ife Empire or the Oyo Empire or things like that. But when they come across it, it's amazingly interesting to them. And they want to know more. So our job is to present it. But you don't have to wait for a nice big shiny building. And that's where people like us come in. How do you create something like that? How do you create that? How do you create all these places whereby people, what we call historical spots, whereby people can come?
Okay, so
and see.
You've said that we don't have the structures for these things, and we don't need to wait for them. So
we don't have a specific structure.
We don't have a
as
specific
the museum, mega museum, mega.
For these things. Yeah. So what are the steps? You've said, okay, we can use the structures we have now to educate people, to enlighten people. What other steps can we take, aside from repatriating our artifacts that are scattered all over the world? What other steps can we take to solve the challenges? And what other challenges are our museums facing? Because it's not just the issue of having a big fine structure, like you say. There are other challenges. What are these challenges, and what are the steps to take in solving them?
Well, for me, the big challenge is getting people to buy into the idea that understanding culture, languages, history, heritage, and culture is important to the economy of the society. It's important to the growth of the society. It's important to the direction of the society. I always say to quite a lot of people and some of my students, or most of them, that if you don't know where you're coming from, you really do not know where you are, and you don't know where you're going. And far be it for me to go about and start criticizing the Nigerian system, the Nigerian this and whatever. Every society has its own challenge, and culture and presentation. Some have had this within, I've been noting the history of their art and production for the last 800 years, 1,000 years. You can go and see a work of art from 1066, and some things from before Christ, from BC, which we have here, but it has never been noted. Nobody, well, a few people have tried to note it down, but it's not been noted. And when some of our works were found and all things like that, some archaeologists, I know the name, I don't want to just go on, said, it was not done by Africans. It can't be. It was done by some sort of Romans that were passing by and all that nonsense. And I keep on saying, when you're talking about what can we do and what can't we do and whatever, let us go to the root of where all this cultural confusion has come from. Slavery wanted to erase everything, or came up to erase everything that is that you hold sacred, so that you can serve the master. Colonization came in and did the same thing, and made it clear that whatever you're doing and how you're doing it, it is not good enough, and it is inferior, it is backward, it doesn't make sense. We are the most superior race. Residues of that we still have today. We can't say that that has all been erased. But we can't even just blame it all on colonization and slavery, because we know that other nations have been very good in assimilating both. You create, if you've ever suffered from slavery, colonization, which is not just particular to Africa, how do we take all that experience to create a new culture, assimilate, take from here, take from there, blend it together to get what is sort of a new tribe, new culture, or new types of living or new ways of living, which is only inevitable for what we will call the human evolution. Remember, Germany and the Jews went through hell when the Jews were going through their, where they've been persecuted, and many other nations like that have gone through horrible persecutions from man against man in humanity. So, but we don't tend to talk as much about the effects of slavery and colonization and the time whereby we threw all our religion, our artifacts, that people took them away because all of a sudden we thought they were all, meaningless. And people who could hold those things sacred and understood why they were there, the story is lost. We don't know what it is now. And, when I speak about certain things, you know that there's a big resistance into even having some of the Benin bronzes back by the anti-Christian movement who think this thing's a fetish. So there are arguments coming from different areas. So you can say, oh, bring it back, we're going to put it out. Some people say, oh, no, this
don't bring it back.
It's a great anti these things because they say they are not, they are not holy, they are evil. I speak to people all the time in Nigeria and come down and say that, look, this Kemba and this thing that you saw in your village and this walk of art, I can never have that in my house, it's evil. And you see some people have some paintings that have some sort of iconography of these images, and somebody will get ill in the house and someone will come and say that it's because of this evil painting, which is something that's just showing your history and that sort of thing. And there is all this, that is all that dynamics that is working against some form of idea of we can easily go back to the past and take what has been taken and bring it back. And everybody is going to be very happy and we're there now.
So you're saying the fight is not only against the people that took this thing, but even within ourselves.
That's right. And it's what I call, when we look at decolonization, we look at what I call double decolonization. So when you say that, let them decolonize themselves and everything, which is good and everything like that, we should also decolonize ourselves and begin to embrace our own culture, languages and everything. I remember when I was a child in one of the primary schools in Nigeria, you couldn't speak Yoruba, Igbo, so you'll be beaten up for it. You're speaking vernacular. You're speaking, you were beaten. Your teacher will beat you up and tell you, no, don't speak that horrible language around here. And this language is the one that you've had, and you've had for what, hundreds of years, your generation, your person, easily and slowly over a space of 300 years being eroded. And people tell you that it is horrible to speak like that. And the only change that came in, that people begin to speak Yoruba with concerted efforts by music, by good people who started speaking, people who started talking about it or whatever. It's only very recently, that you can speak about it. And when you look at our languages, especially in Nigeria, and the amount of philosophy, proverbs, and certain things, everything's so rich about it. And to think that we had 100 years or 50 years of saying that, no, go away, don't speak this thing. It's horrible and everything. You can't erase that, just like that.
Yeah. Talking about languages, some of our Nigerian languages have been, researchers have said, maybe going extinct soon. For instance, the Igbo language, according to UNESCO, may be going extinct soon. Like, how did we get here? We are not only losing our artifacts, we are not only losing our culture, what we wear, the food we eat, the way we behave. It's like we've lost everything and we are still losing it. How do we solve this problem of language going extinct, our culture, our artifacts? What are the solutions to this?
It's very simple. Well, not very simple. I'm just saying that we should have a very simple, clear thinking. The problems with this, as I said, are having your museums, galleries, language laboratories, places. Even if it is not one building, it's going to get into a series of big buildings that show all those things, you know. But if it's not just one building, a concerted effort by private institutions, so-called government. Everybody is expecting everything from government, but it can never, you know, government can't do everything.
Yeah.
And some sort of conservative that, look, we're making a drive, a cultural drive, a cultural revolution, that we look at our art, artifacts, two different things. Contemporary historical art, the artifacts that came out of that. We're looking at all that. We're looking at our languages. There were some of our languages that have actually gone extinct, not that they are going extinct. You know, you can, when you take Igbo, there are many other facets of Igbo and Yoruba and things like that, and Hausa, and some of them have just been, have gone, you know, extinct. You know, so only a few people, only the sort of elderly now that remember that time that we now, you know, can understand or can speak it. So, and why are they going extinct? Because we're not preserving them. It's very simple, you know. That's why I say it's very simple. We're not preserving them. We take them for granted, and not only do we take them for granted, in my research, we disregard them. We think it's not important. We don't think artists are important. When I tell people that they're artists in Britain and everything, who I've met who are multimillionaires through painting, through doing art, and say, no, it can't be possible. Of course it's possible, because these people are part of the culture, part of the history, making a difference, and they are collectors. They're people who want to preserve their culture and their history. And, you know, I always, you know, why do people wake up in the morning and go to somewhere, big museums in America and Britain and everything? They are reconnecting with their culture. They go there to reconnect with their culture, to get some, this education. Education is a big thing when it comes to art, and when it comes to museums, and when it comes to trying to get to preserve our culture and our history. But that is not on the radar when you speak about art in Nigeria. They'll say, what does art got to do with education? And that is where people like us come in, who are creating spaces and creating places whereby we can begin to readdress this in our own way. But we cannot ignore the influence, good or bad, of colonization. We just have to take on the positive, while we understand the negative and what happened. And we said that, look, we're going to take this bad, horrible situation, inhuman situation, and make it a positive for us and for the world.
Talking about education, guys, did I tell you Dr. Gansallo is the founder and director of Florence International School? I told you he's a big catch. Anyways, do you include language and cultural activities into your students' curriculum?
Absolutely. Even today, they are doing career day and all that sort of a thing. And we have cultural day, and we have what I call a language laboratory. So they come in and they said, now we're doing Igbo, Hausa, and Yoruba, which is the three
major languages
in Nigeria. But we're looking at including Japanese and Mandarin.
Okay. So do you think the Nigerian educational policy is creating ways for our cultures to be preserved? For example, history is no longer part of the curriculum. So I know you've said it a lot of times here. Education has a lot to do with preserving not just our languages, but our culture in its entirety. What do you think should be done? Is it just about the history course, or are there more things that the educational segment can do in Nigeria to preserve our languages?
Of course, there's always a lot of room for improvement, and there's a very wide room for improvement in Nigeria now to teach our children and all that, which led me in 2017 or 2018, where when I set up the History, Culture, and Heritage Institute,
Institute.
Nigeria, yeah, started in Lagos. We actually went into about 22 schools around Sulere, Yaba then, and we spoke to students about the Oyo Empire, the Benin Empire, the Ife Empire, and the Oyo, Ife, Benin, the Hausa Empire, or what became the Hausa Empire, and the Ezeirans of the Igbo land, because the Igbos had a priest, not necessarily a king or empire. So we took those 5 out to schools and we spoke to it with people who were interested, some of my co-workers, colleagues that I, sort of took along with me. And we said, let us do this. And we went out to schools and we did our research on this sort of empires, what we could get, and read about them. I went to schools. Then they were just thinking of reintroducing history. That's in 2018. They were thinking of reintroducing history into schools. I was in and out of Nigeria then, like I was working in Britain, came. But one of the reasons that led me to set that one was because people didn't know anything about the history of these empires. Most didn't know. It wasn't taught in schools. And when I meet someone and ask them, oh, wow, where are you from? I'm from Oyo. Which part of Oyo? This and that. Did you know this about Oyo and all that? What does it mean? It's just blank. And even when we get to the, what even shocked me, that when we even get to what we call contemporary history, which people don't know anything for the last 50, 30 years called contemporary history. And when people don't know that, so that, can you remember Abiola and can you remember Abacha, and, can you remember Awolowo, all AAA, and what was their time and what was their ages? Something that if you're a student, you should really drop from your mouth, it should be in your consciousness, even if you take about 5 minutes or 5 seconds to sort of work it out. But, graduates, you don't know. And I always get this thing when they talk about all those things and say that I wasn't born then. So I want to say the consciousness of how people look at history and education and say, I wasn't born then. So the only thing you want to know is when you were born. You don't want to know anything before you were born. Now, what sort of mindset is that? Say, I wasn't born then. Don't ask me that sort of question. I wasn't born then. And also part of my research recently was actually taking all those frames of our political history into the marketplace, into market, real market, and putting them out in the market and asking people that name these people for us, look at this, look at what this was a real project I did 2 years ago. Got frames of our great leaders from Lord Lugard, about Macaulay, from Elijah Ransom Kuti, all through to, I think we stopped, where did we stop through all that? We covered the Civil War, and we covered the Civil War, and I think we stopped with Obasanjo, yes. Was it Obasanjo or before then? Anyway, we covered that history and we took it out. We took these portraits out to the marketplace and to shops and things. I said, look, what do you think? And people did stuff. I came back to my point. Some people we didn't know, people who heard, people did stuff to look and to ask questions and to wonder what's going on. So as to go back to my point, you don't need a big shining building in as built in a cold climate, that the architecture was there for, the cold climate and for preservation. And what we tend to do, we just go and copy that and just bring it over. And we don't even know how to run it, and because we just copy it and bring it over, which is another problem that we have of colonization and neo-colonization. So, it's
talking about this structure.
They're all interwoven.
Yeah, like talking about the structure tonight. I remember we've had a discussion right here in the office. Myself, the head of the Izesan TV, the one you met earlier, we were talking about the structures and how we built our houses before colonization and after colonization. So now you are saying that we may even get the structure, but we don't get the correct structure because what is happening over there suits their weather.
Their climate and the weather.
What happens when we go get a similar structure and put it in Nigeria?
We've had a problem. For somebody who studied architecture, and there is the Museum of Nigerian Traditional Architecture in Jos, which is it's bad. Nobody is preserving it. But you can look at, traditional architecture. When we use this word in our country, in Nigeria, and we say traditional, everybody thinks backward. Everybody thinks not modern, not up to. But tradition is tradition, you know, the way it was then. And they were incredibly sophisticated. They're not just mud huts. That is what they give us to eat. They were just mud huts and they didn't do anything. No. They were no matter where they were placed, next to the river, the wind, how you can get into some areas. So you use mud bricks and everything like that, which is warm at night and cool during the day. Now, why haven't we taken this further and created a symbiosis between that natural understanding and so-called technology that we're all sort of going out to grab, and we have hardly invented any of it. So, you know, we don't do research. We don't think about this thing.
We just take what we
just
see.
say, yeah, we you know, consume it. We just consume, you know, this is it. That's the number. Oh, yeah. That's how they do it in America. That's how they do it in Britain. Fine.
That's
now we are all part of it, whatever. That's the modernized way. Because we have been taught and we've been told that, you know, from years ago through the slavery and colonization that we are not modern. So these works that you're all talking about, that we bring back our artifacts or whatever, there's a huge number of people that will call that fetish. They don't want to go near that because they think it was used in the shrine for evil. I remember I was meeting a very great collector and things like that, and he was showing us his work. And he says when he gets people to come and have a look at his great collection of Nigerian and African, you know, sculptures, artifacts, and things like that. The minute they go, they will say, well, it's a shrine. Why are you taking all these things for a shrine? You know, you're a Christian. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing it? So look at the dynamics that is happening. The person that he or she could not look at the culture and what has happened without thinking that it is all evil, all bad, and a new superior, so-called colonized, I am more superior than you, has erased all that and told you that you're inferior. So now we're talking 2018 here, when somebody was saying that, why are you showing me all this? These are great collections that will give you an insight into Nigerian creativity and working, and the workings of great artists, great craftsmen, great, you know, woodcarvers who created art out of these things, you know, not just craft. And you see all these things, and, you know, people who are meant to be the ones who are pushing this forward in all their big jobs and, you know, all their, you know, great jobs that is a real copy of, you know, European society, are the ones saying that, no, this is all nonsense, it's all evil. And why are you showing this thing? Somebody might ask you here and say, why do you want to go back to language? It's a barbaric language, it's a horrible language, and does that. You know, and then tell people, well, you know, there was a time I was in Japan and everything like that, and they don't want to speak English. They speak, you know, when they come, sometimes when they come to lecture, come to conferences in Britain, they ask for an interpreter. But they can speak English because they love their language. You can speak English and say, give me an interpreter, I'm going to speak in my
language.
And sometimes you do that, you know.
So you've talked about, we still do have a misunderstanding of what some of these artifacts are, if not what all of them are. A lot of us don't even know what they are. Talk more of know their value.
You don't know that. You don't even know what they're saying, what they're representing. You don't have a clue.
So everybody has a role to play in preserving our cultures and tradition. You've said that it's not just the government. We are always calling the government. Government do this, government do that. But we are the government.
That's right.
Let's start from the individual level. What should we do to preserve our culture?
Now then, when I've looked right across the spectrum, when we look at what so-called Nigerian music was like 30 years ago, and the great waves it's doing now, there was a concerted effort to introduce that into the first the Nigerian, now the global sort of consciousness. Now, what can people as individuals do? When I keep on going back and saying education, 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 education is not about taking a pencil on a paper and being forced to write things down. Education is being in contact with knowledge. And through knowledge, you get some form of understanding. So if there's a culture, and now in our society and most all society, things could never move unless you get the people who really want to move this up here and those who have the financial power to back them and to believe in them. Now, we in this country, thank God, and there was a time they said we were next to the Arabs. We're incredibly wealthy. I'm not saying there's no poverty. I'm not saying that there's no hunger and everything. But as a nation, we're a financial powerhouse. And everybody knows that across the world. Nigeria, oil these days. Nigerians are, different class of people, the education, the amount of clout they command financially with the businesses, businessmen, businesswomen, and correct me if I'm wrong, the richest black man in the world is Nigerian, yeah? Or the richest African in the world is a Nigerian.
The richest man in Africa.
The richest man in Africa is a Nigerian, yeah. So, now, if somebody can trust a few of us and other people like yourselves and what you're doing, because there are all sort of great things happening in pots. That's why I say, when you ask me to come and let's have a conversation, I say, of course, because we are all sort of trying to, make a map about this culture. We're trying to map out our culture and how it exists here and the diaspora. And we'll get back to that our culture, that's why I say I have cultures. I don't have one culture, and a lot of people as well, because we exist in this culture, but we also exist as Nigerians in another culture. Now, so when we have good backing by people who really want to do something, not just want to get the money and buy another car, because a lot of people don't trust putting money into a collective individuals because of some sort of things that have, has happened in the past. Oh, we put 500 million into this project and we can't see anything. Nothing happened.
Yeah.
Somebody went to marry another wife. Somebody built a house in the village. Somebody did this with the money that was collectively put in, either by government or by certain individuals, and it's disintegrated and gone, disappeared. There's some passionate individuals who are passionate about getting the revolution and the questions about our culture, languages, museums. Museums is not a building, remember? Idea of a museum and gallery and putting knowledge out there for people to engage with. Of course, you have to sit in a building to get some sort of talk like we're doing now. And we also have to sit in some sort of under the tree. We have to gather somewhere.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily have to be in a Western constructed type of building.
Sure.
Anyway, so if we get, for me, what I say is that the people who are really passionate about this, don't give too much damn about materialism. They got to a certain age, or they are okay. That's why they're not doing this because they want to make money. They want to do it because they want to see something happening. Yeah? And they can write books, they can create exhibitions, they're curators, and all that sort of thing. And you can get the poets, the musician, and we have something sensible and intellectually structural. Intellectually, I'm not saying about materials, I'm not saying building, intellectually structural. Music, here, this, put everything structural. And backed by good finance to push this thing forward, to push it forward. Then you begin to see some sort of change or some sort of understanding. And another thing to say is this not a 1 year affair.
Yeah.
Or a 3 years affair. You look at a 30-year plan. You look at a 50-year plan, and it has to be sustained. Not that if you get somebody to say, okay, I'm not interested in that anymore, then you disrupt the momentum, you disrupt the train of thought, you disrupt everything. And we are also culturally confused. We're in a cultural conundrum. I'm just trying to make sense of it. I'm not saying that I know, or I'm trying to make, I'm sure by you trying to get languages, we're all trying to make sense of it.
Yeah.
So we're all given sort of start thinking, start investigating, start reconstructing. You can't reconstruct something when you don't know how it has been constructed.
Sure.
and
You
say
can
that.
put together what you don't know
What
how
you
it
don't,
was
yeah, exactly.
destroyed.
So you need people to go back and say, look, this is what it is, man. I said, let us see if we can now sort of put it together. So 2 things to answer your question. Cut it all short. Good intellectuals get the real meaning of intellectuals right. Not some. Yeah, we always conjure all these images about someone that has no life and is always reading. Now the intellectuals, people want to do something. And want to engage in education, showing and presenting, etc. Like musicians, everything like that. We want to engage in that, and it has to be backed with good finance sustainability. And to start, you look 30 to 50 years, and you get people that will be coming back who will be learning from them, so that when they go or when they retire, they get the work going. And before you know it, you just need to get a map of what your cultural consciousness is.
So 2 things. We need the intellectuals and we need the finance.
Good. And they can work together. There's no, the dynamics, it's got to work together. They can work together so that we're the ones, once I am backed with being, I can eat 3 square meals a day, I'm okay if I want to eat. Okay, and then my job is to create books or create, aspects of poetry and create a platform for us to begin to understand. And I am being backed and being said that, look, you don't have to go and get a job elsewhere in order to sustain yourself. Or we are backing this. This is how research goes on in other places. Cancer research, all these things. People get there, they pay them, and they research, and that's what they do for 30 years before we can get a breakthrough. That's exactly what we need all here. So there are many things that we cannot take in 1 hour, but we have to.
Yeah,
we have to keep
there's
on
a
going.
lot to be said.
Too many, and that is the state of the cultural nation now.
Okay. Fun fact, yeah. You sound like an advocate of African culture.
Yeah.
So, has this influenced your personal lifestyle in any way? Like, tell us, is there any way that African culture and tradition has influenced you to some point?
Okay. And sometimes when I ask myself this question, when people ask me this question, I tell them, can you define African culture? What is African culture?
It's the way we live as Africans.
What's that? As Africans, we live there. You can look around the room, How we live in our Africans now. How do we live as Africans?
Like right now?
Yeah, like right now. Like when we're going to go out there and when we're going to do our work and when we go there, how are we living like Africans? What is African culture? So we're still going back to the romantic notion.
Yes, we are.
Which is what we want to get away from.
We are getting back there.
Yeah, we want to take from that and put here and create what is now an African culture. And a lot of people I've spoken to, and a lot of people, when my research, when I go on and they say African culture, I ask them, what is African culture? And Africa is not one country. It has 52 countries in it. And when you talk about African culture, there's the East African, South African, the West African, the North African, and the South African. I think I mentioned that. And they have different cultures.
True.
All indigenous to where they live in. So what is African culture?
So do we let's bring you down to Nigeria.
Exactly.
Okay,
So thank you very much.
Let's bring you down to Nigeria.
So you talk about Nigerian culture.
But sometimes when we talk about culture, we don't want to limit it to just ourselves, because it's almost like every African state is going through the same thing. We're all having this fight to repatriate our lost culture and artifacts. Yeah. You want to say something?
No. I said, do you call that a culture or do you call that a consciousness?
Consciousness?
Yeah, that's an African consciousness, not necessarily a culture.
Okay, so you sound like a traditional Nigerian man, an advocate of Nigerian tradition and culture. Yeah. Has it influenced you in any way?
Well,
your personal lifestyle?
My personal life, it's rather interesting and very complicated. And I can't go through that. I mean, unless you have 5 days to stay and we keep on talking.
I don't mind.
It's a long
Well,
story.
off the camera.
That is a very long story, I'm sure, most other people. So, as I said, I have multiple cultures, and all of them have influenced me. And anytime I live within those cultures, I try to find out the history behind certain type of habits or certain type of you can say behavior, a certain type of food, a certain type of way people gather together to sing, to eat, to talk, to teach, and to learn. Now, through all that, we can get some kind of culture coming out. And influence, as I said earlier, that, I find my mother was Nigerian. My father has always spoke to us about Brazil. Bahia is where we are meant to sort of have come sometime in the 19th century, 1865 or 1835, something like that, back to Nigeria, back to Lagos. And his great-grandfather, I think, taking the pilgrimage and things like that. So these things used to interest me about the cultures, about Nigerian culture. Lagos and how Lagos became and how I got my name and how some other person gets a name. Onifade, Onilude. What does that mean? Onifade, Onilude, the drummers come and all that sort of a thing. And we go there and we ask them, what does your name mean? Because if you really want to get into understanding what influence, I ask people their names. I do, don't I? Yeah? I ask people their names and I say that from that name that you got, how did you, what does it mean and where does it come from and how does that work out? And, through going back and, hearing that, or I myself going to another state. When I go to another state, what I want to do is go and say, how do people live there? What do they eat? How is it done? And, what do they used to do normally? There's no museum you can go to get all those things per se, but you can ask people certain things. I always like to gravitate towards, sort of the elder ones. It was there 50 years ago. What was this place like? And some are good to tell you something, and some, of course, they will say, oh, this was it and that. So influence about Nigerian culture is that you find out that Nigeria is an incredibly fascinating place with many, many things that are so disjointed and have been broken. And it's a minefield to bring them out. We can do it, but that's what I was saying, the 30 to 50 years. So, and when I'm in Britain, I'm immersed in that culture as well. How did people get here? How did we get here? And that's why I said that there is another so-called habit of living, styles of living, what you might call culture, in the Nigerian diaspora and the South African diaspora, the West African diaspora. And we hope one day we all come together and we all talk and we all exchange positively. Because people have been in Britain for like 55 years, they went, or 35 years, left Nigeria and go to Britain, go to America, and never come back. And I've never been back and don't intend to go back. And their children are, American, British, don't speak the language. Some, unfortunately, don't speak the language. They are there. They are British, and they're there. So what do you call them? British people with Nigerian origins? And what's their culture? And they're still Africans, and they're British. So where's the African culture? So we can't speak of a African culture. We can speak about the residues of African culture across the world. Or different. It's all different. There's not one goodness thing. It can't be. We can't do that anymore.
Like you said, sir, we can't talk about repatriating African culture or even Nigerian culture in just an hour.
You can't do that in just an hour.
We can't do that even in 5 days, even in 1 year. Like, we have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to understand, and we have a lot to work for. So, we have a tradition instead of a culture. Before I let you go, you have to say something to our audience in your indigenous language.
All right, that's not a problem. But again, wanted to say that we can't speak about something like this in an hour. What I would love to say and what I'm trying to collect at the moment are a lot of conversations like this, which I'm hoping you have quite a bit. Put them together And when we can have, you know, we watch a lot of programs on TV, we go to the cinema, we do all this. There is a sense of, okay, let us take some of our children to go and look at different people speaking about different things, about culture, about things like that. And then we begin to get that conversation going.
Sure.
Do you understand? Because what I find, that is why I almost gave you all a hard time when you said I should come here. Because what I find is that there are pockets of things everywhere. People saying interesting, good things, pocket everywhere, but there's no place that we can all sit down and say that, okay, you're coming in today, we're speaking about, people have spoken about language, speaking about, people have spoken about art, we're speaking about people also, and we come there and say that, all right, today, Saturday morning, we're going to listen to this. You know, and it doesn't have to be a shining big building. I say you could use the buildings that already exist. And things like that. Because somebody might come across what I'm saying now in 5 years' time and say, oh, why didn't I know about this man? You know, and that sort of thing. And we have to use, now that it's the digital revolution, we don't have to, don't let us lose that. Because it can do a lot of work to begin to get into all those things that you say. And, you know, reputation and going back and all the assimilation and everything like that. So don't let me take your time. I have to say something in my tongue.
Yes.
Or in my various tongues.
Just one.
Just
is
one,
fine.
because I have various tongues.
One
I
is
say.
fine.
Okay, one is fine. And that is something to the audience.
Yeah.
Okay. Is she gone for you see, putting it to that, put for there. Is she gone ekutojuwa, and my like Lati return CB. Beya lọ́jọ́ mi beya very soon, not very long. Eshegon is Cesar. And let us continue to enjoy our language and respect it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming, sir. I really enjoyed my time with you, and I'm sure you guys have learned a lot too. It's not just government. We should all be involved. Our parents, our teachers, your friend, you as a friend, as a sister, and what have you. It's all our cross to bear, whether we like it or not. All right, guys, that's all we can take for this episode of State of the Culture. Can't wait to see you guys next time. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, and follow us on all social media handles. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for coming, sir.
Thank you very much.
Bye,
it's my pleasure.
guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.